Who would you consider as the most badass person in history? Raoul Wallenberg. During WW2 he posed as a Swedish ambassador and confidently lied through his teeth at Nazis for years to save tens of thousands of Jews from the Holocaust. There were instances of him flagging down trains bound for death camps, and yelling at the machine gun-toting SS men that Swedish citizens were on board, handing out homemade fake passport documents to as many Jews as possible as he went. He got away with it for so long because fascists have a thing for confident authority figures. The guy was captured by the Red Army in '45 and likely died in a gulag. Juan Pujol Garcia aka Garbo. Guy was uneducated, die-hard anti-fascist Spaniard. During WEI approached the British offering to spy for them. They turn him down. So he approaches the Germans offering to spy for them, and he's accepted. He's given a mission to go to England and report on various things, but he can't gain access. So instead he just goes to the library and gives the Germans a steady stream of book facts mixed with nonsense. The British, who have broken German codes by this time, notice that the Germans have a spy who is talking nonsense and causing the Germans to waste resources looking for non-existent convoys. So they have a change of heart and accept Garcia as a double agent, and he becomes simply one of the world's greatest bullshit artists. MI6 feeds him some stuff to relay, but most of it he makes up himself, including a vast network of fictitious sub-spies, who are all given allowances by the Germans. His work helps fool the Germans into thinking there is a large army group prepared to invade Calais after the diversionary attack on Normandy. Hitler is so convinced of this that he prevents quite a lot of his reserves from reinforcing Normandy. Tens of thousands of lives are likely saved, if not hundreds of thousands, all because one man had the balls to walk into a German embassy, offer to be a spy, and then feed the Nazis a steady stream of bullshit. Most of it he makes up himself, including a vast network of fictitious sub-spies, who are all given allowances by the Germans. Garbo, that vital convoy. My agent couldn't report on it because he fell deathly ill. Garbo, a bit later, I'm sorry to report that agent died of his illness. He left a widow behind. Garbo, a bit later on, a posthumous commendation for my heroic agent, and a pension for his grieving widow. Why, thank you. I'll make sure she gets it. Edit. Yes, the pension for the fictitious spy's widow was really paid by the German government, and yes, Garbo pocketed it. He also got the Germans to pay him a salary as their spy, and got them to pay the salaries straight to Garbo, for all of Garbo's fictitious spies as well. Garbo not only screwed over the German military with his double agent ploy, he made bank in the process. I was told a story of Gurkha in WW2 where they were going on a joint operation and the plan was being explained to them. It was an airborne operation, behind enemy lines, very small chance of surviving. Afterwards they were asked if they wanted to back out or if they had any questions. The Gurkha leader said they would go if the pilot would fly as low as possible and try to fly over grass when they jumped. They didn't know they would be given parachutes. These psychos were willing to just jump out of a fucking plane. Ben Salomon. Dude was just a dentist who got drafted into World War II. He was tending to injured soldiers when 4 Japanese soldiers entered the tent and killed a man he had just saved. This man killed all 4 of them, then grabbed a machine gun and fired upon the incoming Japanese forces, letting the injured escape. They say when his body was discovered, 98 enemy troops lay dead in front of him. He had been shot 72 times and bayoneted over 24 times before he died. What a legend. Daniel Inouye, senator from Hawaii. We are vet, Japanese-American who had to prove himself every step of the way through the European theater of operations, and to me an honest-to-goodness hero. In 1943, when the U.S. Army dropped its enlistment ban on Japanese Americans, Inouye curtailed his pre-medical studies at the University of Hawaii and enlisted in the Army. 6. He volunteered to be part of the segregated Alnase 442nd Regimental Combat Team. This army formation was mostly made up of second-generation Japanese Americans from Hawaii and the mainland. Inoue was promoted to sergeant within his first year, and he was assigned as a platoon sergeant. He served in Italy in 1944 during the Romarno campaign before his regiment was transferred to the Vosges Mountains region of France, where he spent 2 weeks in the battle to relieve the lost battalion, a battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment that was surrounded by German forces. He received a battlefield commission to second lieutenant for his actions there, becoming the youngest officer in his regiment. At one point while he was leading an attack, a shot struck him in the chest directly above his heart, but the bullet was stopped by the $2 silver he happened to have stacked in his shirt pocket. He continued to carry the coins throughout the war in his shirt pocket as good luck charms, until he lost them shortly before the battle in which he lost his arm. On April 21, 1945, Lieutenant Inoue was grievously wounded while leading an assault on a heavily defended ridge near San Terenzo in Liguria, Italy, called Nicole Musetto. The ridge served as a strong point of the German fortifications known as the Gothic Line, the last and most unyielding line of German defensive works in Italy. As he led his platoon in a flanking maneuver, 3 German machine guns opened fire from covered positions 40 yards away, pinning his men to the ground. Inoue stood up to attack and was shot in the stomach. Ignoring his wound, he proceeded to attack and destroy the first machine gun nest with hand grenades and his Thompson submachine gun. When informed of the severity of his wound, he refused treatment and rallied his men for an attack on the second machine gun position, which he successfully destroyed before collapsing from blood loss. As his squad distracted the third machine gunner, Inoue crawled toward the final bunker, coming within 10 yards. As he raised himself on his left elbow and cocked his right arm to throw his last hand grenade, a German soldier saw Inoue and fired a 30mm CSPCR anti-personnel rifle grenade from inside the bunker, which struck Inoue directly on his right elbow. The high-explosive grenade failed to detonate, saving Inoue from instant death but amputating most of his right arm at the elbow, except for a few tendons and a flap of skin, via blunt force trauma. Despite this gruesome injury, Inoue was again saved from likely death due to the blunt, low-velocity grenade tearing the nerves in his arm unevenly and incompletely, which involuntarily squeezed the grenade tightly via a reflex arc instead of going limp and dropping it at Inoue's feet. However, this still left him crippled, in terrible pain, under fire with minimal cover and staring at a live grenade clenched in a fist that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. Inoue's horrified soldiers moved to his aid, but he shouted for them to keep back out of fear his severed fist would involuntarily relax and drop the grenade. As the German inside the bunker began hastily reloading his rifle with regular full metal jacket ammunition, replacing the wood-tipped rounds used to propel rifle grenades, Inoue quickly pried the live hand grenade from his useless right hand and transferred it to his left. The German soldier had just finished reloading and was aiming his rifle to finish him off when Inoue threw his grenade through the narrow firing slit, killing the German, stumbling to his feet with the remnants of his right arm hanging grotesquely at his side and his Thompson in his offhand, braced against his hip. Inoue continued forward, killing at least one more German before suffering his fifth and final wound of the day, in his left leg, which finally halted his one-man assault for good and sent him tumbling unconscious to the bottom of the ridge. He awoke to see the worried men of his platoon hovering over him. His only comment before being carried away was to gruffly order them back to their positions, saying nobody called off the war. TLDR, blew up several German machine gun bunkers with mad grenades as he got shot in the stomach, lost an arm, and had to throw left-handed, then told the rest of the platoon to keep going because shit wasn't done with, blocked a bullet with silver dollars, went home to Hawaii, became a senator, and if he'd run for president I'd have voted for him. Absolute badass. Galvarino, he was a fierce Mapuche warrior that had both of his hands chopped off as punishment when captured by the Spanish during the Vaca War. Rather than slaughter Galvarino, the Spanish sent him back to the Mapuche to send a message, but instead of causing the Mapuche to surrender, it had the opposite effect. Galvarino decided to have 2 knives lashed to the stumps where his hands used to be. He learned to fight without hands while using the knives as weapons. Less than a month later, Galvarino fought with the Mapuche against the Spanish again. Around 3,000 Mapuche warriors engaged 1,500 of the Spanish on November 30, 1557. At the Battle of Milarapu. Although they didn't win, Galvarino killed several of the Spanish before the army of 3,000 were all killed. Desmond Doss, an army medic in Wai who was constantly belittled and abused by his battalion and superiors for refusing to use a weapon as it went against his beliefs. Then, when he landed in Okinawa and more than half of his battalion were shredded by Japanese machine gun fire, Desmond Doss crawled through the dirt over the course of several days to as many of his injured allies as he could and dragged them all the way back to the 40-foot cliff they had scaled up from, then lowered them to safety. Some of these injured men were lying 15 feet from the enemy machine gun itself, and all the while Doss wore his medic helmet, which stood out like a giant bullseye on a battlefield where the Japanese soldiers were ordered to kill doctors first to crush morale. In the end he had saved the lives of 75 men, and survived with an arm fracture from a sniper round and several pieces of shrapnel embedded in his body from when he tried to kick a grenade away from him and his men. He is the only soldier without a gun to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Edit, the first conscientious objector to be awarded the Medal of Honor. There have been others since. There's actually been 3 soldiers who were conscientious objectors that were awarded the Medal of Honor. Desmond Doss was the first. The army credited him with over 100 lives saved when they were first pushed off the cliff, but Desmond contended that it couldn't have been more than 50, so they split the difference on his citation. But the 75 men saved was just the beginning. Multiple times Desmond would crawl out 200-300 yards to render aid to wounded soldiers, many times under constant machine gun fire. A couple days later 4 men were cut down assaulting a strongly defended cave, and he advanced through a shower of grenades to within 8 yards of enemy forces where he rendered aid and then made 4 trips back and forth bringing the men to safety. Another time, a soldier was severely wounded from fire from a cave, so Desmond crawled to within 25 feet of the enemy, rendered aid, and then crawled with him back 100 feet to friendly lines. After staying out in the open during a night attack, hoping he would be mistaken by enemy forces as one of their own infiltrating, he went around administering aid to wounded soldiers until he kicked a grenade away and was wounded in both legs. Rather than call another aid man from cover to help him, he cared for his own injuries and waited 5 hours before litter bearers reached him. The 2 litter bearers and Doss got caught in an enemy attack and Desmond say a soldier more critically wounded than him, so he rolled off the stretcher and ordered the 2 stretcher bearers to take the wounded soldier instead. He then gets shot in the arm, suffering the compound fracture, so he binds a rifle stock to his arm and then crawls 300 yards over rough terrain to the aid station. Desmond Doss is the most badass of badasses. Peter Freuchen. He was a Danish explorer, journalist, author and anthropologist. He is widely known for his exploration of the Arctic Circle and discovery of vast areas of Greenland. He was an indigenous rights activist. Having married an Inuit woman, he escaped the death warrant issued by the Third Reich for punching Nazis, received an Academy Award for the Best Motion Picture in 1933, won the $64,000 question as a contestant on the game show. He wrestled a polar bear and won, and as if this all wasn't enough, he escaped a near-death encounter in a blizzard by fashioning a spade out of his own frozen feces. And she was really good at it. Took out several machine gun nests and artillery guns in her first fight. Often her tank would get damaged. She would disregard orders, leap out and repair it under heavy fire, get back in and go back to blowing shit up. This woman's anger toward Germans for killing her husband is legendary. She did this in every battle until she was killed for fixing a tank under heavy gun fire. She finished the job, but unfortunately, the tank was hit with a shell and the crew were killed. She was Leroy Jenkins if he actually was good in battle. That's why she was the first woman in a battalion to be awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, which as you can guess, is the highest honor you can possibly receive in Russia. She is buried in a place of honor. He picked her up outside of Modesto, California, after which he knocked her unconscious with a sledgehammer, spent the whole night raping her, and tortured her by severing both her forearms with the hatchet. Singleton figured she was dead or near death and he threw her off of a 30-foot cliff on Interstate 5 near Del Puerto Canyon, leaving her naked and bleeding out. She mitigated the bleeding from her forearms by shoving them into mud, and the mud suppressed her bleeding while she managed to pull herself back up the cliff. She walked for 3 miles, naked, covered in blood, and armless, before finding and alerting a passing couple, who took her to a hospital. By the time of Singleton's arrest, Vincent wore prosthetic arms. Wow! She was 15 and had thought about sticking her arms in mud to stop the bleeding, after being unconscious all night from being hit with a sledgehammer. Smart girl. It's why we hang Canadian flags in some parts of the Netherlands when we celebrate Liberation Day. Canada liberated most of the Netherlands above the Great Rivers, which split the country in north and south, and the town that Leo liberated happens to be Seoul. Edit. To all Canadians who love to see how we invite Canadian veterans to celebrate Liberation Day in the Netherlands so that we can thank them for their service. They will tour 12 Dutch cities in via vehicles while Dutch people cheer at them like if it's 1945 again. Another cool fact: when the Dutch royal family fled the Netherlands, they took refuge in Canada. The day when Princess Juliana got a child, Canada changed the law that made the hospital Dutch territory so that her daughter could be born Dutch. Now till this day the Netherlands is sending tons of flowers every year to a park in Ottawa, and we even bred a special tulip that looks like the Canadian flag, which looks like this. Horatius Cocles of the early Roman Republic is also a strong contender, single-handedly holding off an entire army while other soldiers destroyed the bridge he was standing on. He was so effective that the invading Clusium soldiers just resulted in lobbing swords at him to see if it would work. He eventually got a wound to the ass, called for bridge to be pushed down and jumped into the Tiber, swimming to safety. Another story. From the same conflict: Gaius Mucius Scaevola, who was a young Roman who volunteered to assassinate the king of Clusium, making his way into the enemy camp disguised as a fleeing slave. Unfortunately, due to a mix-up, Gaius killed an advisor rather than the king. The king interrogated Gaius and threatened to throw him into the fire unless he revealed the further plots to kill him. Gaius casually walked over to the fire and stuck his hand in without flinching. The king, clearly unnerved by the absolute balls on the kid, just tells him to float the camp. Definitely Major Hugh Thompson. I'm sure there are people who have done similarly brave things, but not that I know about. In 1968, Thompson managed to stop the My Lai massacre almost single-handedly. He arrived after many civilians had already been killed, and couldn't understand how they had died. After realizing his fellow American soldiers were firing on unarmed civilians, he landed his helicopter between the Vietnamese and the soldiers. He then told the troops that if they continued to do what they were doing, he and his crew would open fire on them. After getting back to base, he filed a complaint about what he had witnessed. His complaint was covered up, and he was shunned as a traitor. It wasn't until 1998 that the army acknowledged he did the right thing. It's common to be brave in war when you know that you'll be lauded as a hero. It's another thing entirely to do it knowing you'll be seen as a traitor. He turned against his troops and country to protect innocent lives, despite what it would cost him, and I think that's about as brave as you can get. Jeff Widener, the man who took the photo, is also a badass on his own right. He knew the Chinese government was monitoring every Western citizen because they could leak info, so they denied him many photo ops. He was already hit by a rock in a protest some days prior. His camera took the worst of the blow, and he was sitting in a balcony in the hotel where he took the famous photo. Seconds after taking it, he got the feeling that a Chinese policeman saw him taking the photo, so he took the film, hid it below a flower vase, and waited for the police to arrive. And they did. They arrived like half an hour later. They checked everything on him, checked all the photos and whatnot. The police found nothing on him, so they left him alone. Widener grabbed the film hidden in the vase, left China, and then released the photo in the West. Man, there is something that touches my heart thinking of soldiers a generation down being led to battle by his back-skinned drums, with young soldiers getting pumped thinking about how their fathers was led into battle looking at the back that's speeding them forward. It's just powerful.